Picture this. I'm sitting in a crowded high school auditorium, surrounded by hundreds of families celebrating their children's graduation. There's an empty chair right next to me where my husband should be sitting. My son Danny walks across that stage, receives his diploma, and looks out into the crowd with the biggest smile. I'm clapping and cheering, but I'm completely alone. What I discovered later that day didn't just change my life. It shattered everything I thought I knew about the man I'd been married to for 22 years. If you've ever felt like something was wrong but couldn't put your finger on it, this story will hit close to home. Make sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon because you won't want to miss how this unfolds. My name is Eliza, and I've always considered myself a simple woman. For the past 22 years, I've been married to Richard, and we have one son together, Danny. I never had big dreams or grand ambitions. I was perfectly content being a housewife, taking care of our home, and supporting my family. Richard worked in sales for a medical equipment company, and while we weren't rich, we were comfortable. But over the past few months, something had started to feel off. Richard was working more late nights than usual. He'd get mysterious phone calls that he'd taken another room. Weekend business trips became more frequent. When I'd ask about his work, he'd give me vague answers and quickly change the subject. I told myself it was just a busy period at his company. After all, Richard had always been a hard worker, and I trusted him completely. Danny's high school graduation was supposed to be our big celebration. Our only child was finishing this important chapter, and we'd been planning for months. Richard had promised he'd take the day off no matter what. "Nothing is more important than Danny's graduation," he'd said, looking me straight in the eyes. I wouldn't miss it for the world. The morning of graduation day, I woke up excited. I had Danny's favorite breakfast ready, his graduation outfit pressed and hanging in his room, and my camera charged with extra batteries. Richard was supposed to drive us to the ceremony together, and then we planned to take Danny out for a special dinner afterward. But at 7 in the morning, Richard's phone rang. I was in the kitchen making coffee when I heard him talking in hushed, urgent tones in the bedroom. My stomach dropped because I recognized that tone. It was the same one he'd been using for all those mysterious calls lately. He came into the kitchen looking stressed, already reaching for his car keys. "Eliza, I'm so sorry, but there's an emergency at work. A major client is threatening to cancel their contract, and I'm the only one who can handle this situation. I have to leave for Chicago right now." I felt my heart sink. "Richard, it's Danny's graduation day. You promised you'd be there." I know, he said, avoiding my eyes. "But this client represents 30% of our annual revenue. If we lose them, it could mean layoffs, maybe even my job. I'll try to make it back in time, but I can't promise anything. You understand, right?" What could I say? We needed his income. I forced a smile and nodded. "Of course. Work comes first. Danny and I will be fine." He kissed my forehead quickly and was gone before I could say anything else. I stood in our empty kitchen, holding my coffee mug, trying not to cry. This was supposed to be a family day, one of the most important days in our son's life. I went upstairs to wake Danny and had to deliver the news. "Dad had a work emergency," I explained, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's just going to be you and me today, sweetheart." Danny's face fell for just a moment, but then he shrugged in that way teenagers do. "It's okay, Mom. Dad's been working a lot lately. At least you'll be there." I spent the next few hours getting ready by myself, taking photos of Danny in his cap and gown, and trying to maintain a cheerful attitude. But inside, I felt so disappointed and, honestly, a little embarrassed. All the other families would be there together, and I'd be the single mom sitting alone. When we arrived at the school auditorium, it was packed with families. I watched parents taking pictures with their graduates, whole extended families posing together, fathers adjusting their sons' ties, and mothers wiping away proud tears. Danny went to line up with his classmates, and I found our reserved seats, 2 chairs in the middle section with a perfect view of the stage. I sat down and placed my purse on Richard's empty chair, hoping maybe he'd surprise us and show up at the last minute. But as the ceremony began and the seats around me filled with complete families, that empty chair felt like a spotlight on my loneliness. The graduation ceremony was beautiful. Danny looked so handsome and grown up in his cap and gown. When they called his name, I stood up and cheered louder than anyone else, taking pictures and recording everything on my phone so Richard could see it later. But as Danny walked across that stage and looked out into the crowd, I could see his eyes searching for his father. He found me instead, and I waved enthusiastically, but I knew it wasn't the same. After the ceremony, Danny came over to me with his diploma, beaming with pride. "We did it, Mom," he said, hugging me tight. "You did it, sweetheart. I'm so proud of you," I said, holding him close and blinking back tears. "Where's Dad?" he asked, looking around. "Did he make it back?" I shook my head. "His meeting ran long, but he's so proud of you. He wanted to be here more than anything." Danny nodded, but I could see the disappointment in his eyes, and it broke my heart. After we got home and Danny went to his room to call his friends, I decided to try calling Richard. I wanted to share some of the photos and videos from the ceremony, and I hoped he'd be finished with his business meeting by now. The phone went straight to voicemail. I tried again an hour later, same thing. By evening, I was starting to worry. Even when Richard was in important meetings, he usually found a way to send me a quick text or answer my calls, especially on such an important day. I decided to call his office directly. Maybe his secretary would know when he was expected back or how the meeting had gone. But when Carol, his longtime secretary, answered the phone, her response confused me. "Oh, hi, Eliza. How was Danny's graduation? Richard was so excited about it." "It was wonderful," I said, "but Richard had to miss it for that emergency client meeting in Chicago. Do you know when he's expected back?" There was a long pause. "I'm sorry, what client meeting? Richard didn't have any meetings scheduled for today. In fact, he specifically asked me to keep his calendar completely clear for Danny's graduation. He's been talking about it for weeks." My blood went cold. "Are you sure?" He said there was an emergency with a major client threatening to cancel their contract. "Eliza, I handle all of Richard's scheduling and client communications. There's been no emergency and certainly no trip to Chicago. Is everything okay?" I mumbled something about confusion and hung up quickly, my hands shaking. Where was Richard? If he wasn't at work, where had he been all day? And why would he lie to me about something so important? That night, I couldn't sleep. Richard still hadn't returned my calls, and now I knew he hadn't been at work. I kept running through all the possible explanations in my mind. Maybe he had a surprise planned for Danny and didn't want to ruin it. Maybe there was some kind of family emergency he was handling without wanting to worry me. But deep down, I knew something was very wrong. The next morning, Richard still wasn't home and wasn't answering his phone. I made the decision to look through his home office, something I'd never done before in all our years of marriage. I'd always respected his privacy and trusted him completely. His desk was neat and organized, just like always. I went through his appointment book first. Carol was right. Graduation day was clearly marked with "Danny's graduation, do not schedule anything," written in his handwriting. So he definitely hadn't forgotten or double-booked himself. In his desk drawer, I found credit card statements that I'd never seen before. Richard had always handled our finances and I'd never questioned it. But looking at these statements, I saw charges I didn't recognize. Regular purchases at grocery stores in a part of town we never visited, payments to a daycare center, multiple charges at a children's clothing store. My heart was pounding as I kept digging. I found receipts tucked away in a folder, receipts for birthday gifts, toys, and even a receipt for a birthday cake that said, "Happy 6th birthday, Emma," in frosting. Who was Emma? In another folder, I found something that made my blood run cold, a lease agreement for an apartment across town. Richard's name was on it as the primary tenant, and it had been active for the past 8 years. 8 years! I stared at that address for a long time, my mind racing. There had to be an explanation. Maybe Richard was helping a friend or relative? Maybe it was some kind of business arrangement I didn't know about? But I knew I had to see for myself. I drove across town to the address on the lease, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles were white. It was a nice residential neighborhood with modest apartments and small houses. Young families were outside playing with their children, people were walking their dogs, elderly couples were tending to their gardens. It looked like the kind of place where people built quiet, happy lives. I found the building and sat in my car across the street, not sure what I was looking for or what I expected to find. Maybe the apartment would be empty, or maybe there would be some innocent explanation for everything. Then I saw Richard's car. His blue sedan was parked right there in the building's parking lot, like it belonged there, like he lived there. I sat frozen in my car, staring at his vehicle and trying to process what this meant. Then the front door of the building opened, and Richard walked out. But he wasn't alone. He was holding hands with a woman I'd never seen before. She was younger than me, maybe in her early 30s, with long blonde hair and a warm smile. Behind them came two small children, a little girl who looked about 6 years old and a boy who couldn't have been more than 4. I watched in complete shock as Richard lifted the little boy onto his shoulders and ruffled the girl's hair affectionately. The woman, whoever she was laughing at something he said. They looked like a family. They looked happy. They looked like everything I thought Richard and I were, except they were younger and newer, and I wasn't part of the picture. Richard was living a completely different life just 20 minutes away from our house. The little girl must have been Emma, the one whose birthday cake receipt I'd found, the daycare charges, the children's clothing, the grocery store purchases. It all made sense now. Richard had another family. I started crying right there in my car, watching my husband load these children into his vehicle like he'd done it 1,000 times before. The woman kissed him goodbye before getting into her own car, and I could see the love and familiarity in that simple gesture. How long had this been going on? How had I been so blind? I sat in that parking lot for over an hour after they left, crying and trying to figure out what to do next. Part of me wanted to follow them, to see where they went and what they did together. Part of me wanted to knock on the apartment door and confront the woman directly. But mostly, I just felt numb and broken. I thought about all the signs I'd missed or chosen to ignore. The late nights, the mysterious phone calls, the weekend business trips, the way Richard had become distant and distracted over the past few years. I'd attributed it all to work stress, but now I realized he'd been living an entirely separate life. I took out my phone and started taking pictures of his car in the parking lot, the apartment building, anything that could serve as evidence. I don't know why I felt like I needed proof, maybe because the whole situation felt so surreal that I worried I might convince myself I'd imagined it. As I drove home, my mind was spinning with questions. Did Danny know? Did Richard's co-workers know? How many people in my life were keeping this secret from me? How long had I been the fool who didn't know her own husband was living a double life? But more than anything, I felt angry. Angry that Richard had missed Danny's graduation for another family. Angry that he'd been lying to me for years. Angry that while I'd been faithfully taking care of our home and supporting his career, he'd been building a completely different life with someone else. By the time I got home, I'd made my decision. I was going to confront Richard directly and demand the truth. I was done being kept in the dark. Richard came home around 10 o'clock that night, acting like nothing unusual had happened. He walked in with a tired sigh, loosening his tie like he'd just finished a long day at the office. "Hey, honey," he said casually. "Sorry I missed the graduation. How did it go?" I was sitting at our kitchen table with all the evidence I'd found spread out in front of me, the credit card statements, the receipts, the lease agreement, and the photos I'd taken of his car at the apartment building. "Sit down, Richard," I said quietly. He looked at the papers on the table and his face went completely white. For a moment, he just stood there, and I could see him trying to figure out what to say, how to explain what couldn't be explained away. "Eliza, I can explain." "Don't," I interrupted. "Don't lie to me anymore. I know about the apartment. I know about the woman and the children. I saw you with them today." Richard collapsed into the chair across from me, putting his head in his hands. "How did you find out? Does it matter?" "The question is, how long has this been going on?" He was quiet for a long time, and when he finally looked up at me, there were tears in his eyes. 8 years, he whispered. 8 years. Danny had been 10 years old when this started. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. Her name is Lisa, he continued without me asking. We met at a conference and it was supposed to be just one night, but then things got complicated. She got pregnant and I couldn't just walk away from my child. Children, I corrected. There are 2 of them. He nodded miserably. Emma is 6 and little Jake is 4. They're good kids, Eliza. They don't know about you and Danny. They don't know about us? I could barely speak. We're your real family, Richard. We're your wife and son. You're both my real family, he said desperately. I love you all. I never meant for this to happen, but once it started, I didn't know how to stop. I couldn't hurt Lisa and the kids, but I couldn't hurt you and Danny either. So you chose to lie to everyone instead? I was trying to protect everyone. I was trying to make it work. I stared at this man I'd been married to for over 2 decades, and I realized I didn't know him at all. You missed your son's graduation for them, I said. The most important day in Danny's life so far, and you chose to be with your other family instead. Richard started crying harder. I know how awful that was. Jake had a fever, and Lisa needed help, and I thought Danny's graduation would just be a few hours, and I could make it up to him later. Make it up to him? I stood up, feeling angrier than I'd ever felt in my life. You can't make up for missing your child's graduation, Richard. That moment is gone forever. Danny looked for you in that crowd, and you weren't there because you were playing daddy to someone else's children. They're my children too, he said quietly, and that's when I knew our marriage was over. The next few weeks were a blur of difficult conversations, legal consultations, and heartbreaking decisions. Richard begged me to forgive him, to let him end things with Lisa and focus on our family. But I couldn't get past the 8 years of lies, and more importantly, I couldn't forget that he'd chosen his other family over Danny on the most important day of our son's young life. When we told Danny the truth, he was devastated and angry. Dad has other kids? He kept asking. Kids he chose over us? Richard tried to explain that it wasn't about choosing, that he loved Danny just as much as his other children, but Danny wasn't having it. If you loved me just as much, you would have been at my graduation, he said simply, and Richard had no answer for that. The divorce proceedings were messy and painful. Richard had been supporting 2 households for 8 years, which explained why our finances had always been tight despite his good salary. The apartment, the daycare, the extra groceries and clothes and birthday parties, it had all been coming out of what should have been our family budget. I learned that Lisa knew about me and Danny. She'd known from the beginning that Richard was married, but she'd believed him when he said our marriage was over in everything but name, that he was just staying for Danny's sake until he graduated high school. She'd been waiting 8 years for Richard to leave me. In the end, Richard had to make a choice. He couldn't afford to support 2 households anymore, especially with divorce and custody payments looming. He chose Lisa and their children. I think part of me always knew he would. 6 months later, Danny and I have built a new life together. It's quieter than our old life, and money is tighter, but it's honest. There are no more mysterious phone calls or unexplained absences. No more wondering why my husband seems distracted or why he's working so many late nights. Danny is starting college in the fall, and he's excited about the future. He sees his father occasionally, but their relationship will never be the same. Danny can't forget that Richard missed his graduation, and honestly, neither can I. I've started working part-time at a local bookstore, and I'm surprised by how much I enjoy having a job and my own income. For the first time in over 20 years, I'm making my own decisions and building my own life. I've also been going to therapy, trying to understand how I missed the signs for so long, or if I did see them but chose to ignore them because facing the truth was too scary. My therapist says it's common for people to trust their partners completely, especially in long marriages, and that Richard's deception was skillful and deliberate. Looking back, I can see moments when my instincts told me something was wrong. The way Richard would put his phone face down when I entered the room, How he'd started doing his own laundry instead of letting me do it, probably to hide evidence of his double life. The way he'd become less interested in making plans with me and Danny, always claiming he was too tired or too busy. But I'd loved him, and I'd trusted him, and I'd wanted to believe his explanations. Sometimes the people we trust most are the ones hiding the biggest secrets. If this story resonated with you, please like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe for more real-life stories that remind us we're not alone in our struggles. What would you have done in my situation? Let me know in the comments below. If there's one thing I want you to take away from my story, it's this: trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, don't ignore that feeling just because it's easier or more comfortable to pretend everything is fine. I spent years making excuses for Richard's behavior because I didn't want to face the possibility that my marriage wasn't what I thought it was. I'm not saying you should become suspicious and paranoid about everyone in your life, but if the person you love and trust most starts acting differently, if their explanations don't quite add up, if you find yourself making excuses for them or feeling like something is missing, pay attention to those feelings. And if you're going through something similar right now, please know that you're stronger than you think you are. The truth is painful, but it's also liberating. Living a lie, even unknowingly, is exhausting. When you finally know the truth, you can start making real decisions about your life. I won't pretend that starting over after 22 years of marriage has been easy. There are days when I feel lonely, days when I worry about money, days when I wonder if I made the right choice. But I sleep better at night knowing that my life is honest now. I know where I stand, and I know that the people in my life are there because they choose to be, not because they're living some elaborate deception. Danny and I are closer now than we've ever been. We've learned that we can depend on each other, and that family isn't just about who's related to you. It's about who shows up for you when it matters. Richard missed Danny's graduation, but I was there, and I'll be there for every important moment in my son's life going forward, because that's what real love and commitment look like. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you can also be the thing that sets you free.